All right. Thank you very much, Paul. Appreciate being here tonight. In case you don't know who I am, I'm Steve Petrucci. I am the lead programmer for Magical Light Shows. I've taught this class a few different times over the past year, most recently at the Magical Light Shows Academy that we just held in February at Disney World. And what I want to try to do with this class is to get you to the point where you can create your own 3D model in xLights for your respective building or house. And then talk a little bit about navigating. And so this class is actually two classes into one. So after the first portion, it will be how to create the actual what we call the mesh, get the actual 3D rendering, and then we'll go into briefly just some navigating tips through 3D and just kind of ideas to look for and how you're navigating. So this is titled just beginning 3D home modeling from hover to xLights integration. Some things we'll cover. My background is a teacher, and so I'd like to give you up front what we were going to learn, some different things. This is a PowerPoint, as you see, and I will be able to share this before we end the night. I'll put it in the chat so you can download it. If worst case, we'll be able to find it somehow to share it with you. We're going to discover the tools needed to get a 3D model of your home, which includes the Hover app and what's needed, SketchUp, using it for free and how to use it, as well as setting up our 3D folder with all the contents and placing it in our show folder. So why 3D? Well, 3D allows for more accurate scaling of our project, creating multiple viewpoints from different angles, as well as seeing what your audience will see. When I first got into xLights and I started using 3D, that was my reasoning for 3D. One is looks cool, plain and simple. People like to use 3D just because it's a different way of viewing your layout. But also you can use it from different viewpoints of what your audience is going to see. You can in 3D bring in different textures as far as landscaping, trees, shrubbery. You can do that. I will not discuss how to do that because I have never done that for my own property. Um, but you can do that. But for me, using it to get an idea of what it's going to look like at a 45-degree angle down the street, if someone's parked in a car there, it gives you a good idea of what their viewpoint is. So where do I start? When I first started with this, I had no clue. I got help through xLights Facebook group and some other people helped me. But then, I did it for myself because we recently moved. And then I built this class off of what I learned. And so first thing is the Hover app. The Hover app is a measurements in 3D app. It's a free app to use. And quite frankly, it's a very powerful app. How it works, I could not tell you. I'm not that smart. I don't know what they do, how they get all the information, but we can use it to our advantage. It's free for us to use. It's available for both iPhone and Android. When you sign up, make sure you sign up as a homeowner. Evidently, the first time I signed up as a contractor, or the option that was selected then was contractor. And so this past most recent time of interacting with Hover, I had to go a few more steps to get what I needed from them. It was free, but I had to go a few more steps because they just had my information down incorrectly. So what do I do with Hover? Well, first thing, when we download the app, we bring up the app, and we're going to click on the plus button or the add button. We're going to create a new project. In this project, we're going to make sure we create exterior measurements. I want to zoom in. Can you see me zooming in? Yes, hopefully. Okay. Um, what we will do is we'll choose exterior measurements because that's what we're needing. That will allow us to, one, get measurements of the majority of the outside of our home, and it's pretty accurate. It comes within, I'd say, within an inch. But then also it gives you, that's the details on the outside. Continuing, we want to get started. So we got to get started. So we come up here. Oops, sorry about that. And as you can see, I taught this class for Virtual Christmas Summit. And so that's what I named this as, Virtual Christmas Summit Party House. This is my old address when we lived in Wilmington, North Carolina. No longer live there, so I don't have a problem sharing that address. Um, and then I'm going to upload by photos. And then over here, oh, whoa, sorry, let's go back. You're going to take 8 different photos of your house, front, back, side, and then the different corners, or your 4 corners. And what you want to try to do is get as clear photos as you can. So then when you submit it, they can see your home without any issues, without any blocking. If you do have trees in the way, that doesn't tend to be a problem for them. They will work around that and make sure that they can give you the quality 3D model that you need. So, so what do we get? We get from Hover, we get a complete measurements document. This document is multiple pages long, and within this document, you have all kinds of different measurements from the actual project. So this is our old house. This is one of the pictures I took, and in return, this is what they sent me. Um, I got exact measurements of all my lines, my windows, my spacing on the steps, everything. And it's pretty accurate. So the nice thing is when I was building out my display, instead of getting up on the roof and having to measure everything by hand, I started with these measurements and they were very accurate. Are they perfect? No, but they are pretty accurate. I would say certainly within 2 inches, if not closer. And so that is one way you can do safely from the ground is getting measurements of, let's say you have a 2-story roof line, you don't want to get up there just to measure, you can use this as a guide point. So then what do I get? I get the 3D model of my property. This will not work with xLights. So let's see if I can go back over here. Actually, what I'll do is I'll just click on it. It should take me to we go. So this is the 3D rendering that they send. So you can move around it just as if you're in xLights when you're using 3D. And this is very accurate. The color itself, the actual what it looked like, because this house, our driveway went along the left and the garage was in the back. The scaling was very accurate. The only issue I had is the front door was a single door with 2 side dormers, but you know what? That's okay. Everything else looked great and worked perfect for us for what I needed. However, like I said, this will not work in xLights. It's not the right file. No, not right. It's not the right file type. So what do we do now? So we've gotten Hover. What we have to do is email Hover asking for the .skp file or the SketchUp file. The email address is support@hover.to. They will, all you got to do is simply email them, say that you're in the Christmas light hobby. You're looking to create a 3D rendering of your home. And if you can if they could send you the SketchUp file, the .skp. And I've never heard of anyone having any issues. My issues that I ran into most recently was because of the file or the sign up type that they had me under. But they worked it out. It was no big deal. They have great customer service. So they are a company that is very helpful for what we need. So once you get your SKP, we're going to save it to downloads. Once we have it saved to downloads, we're then going to take it and open it in SketchUp. Now, SketchUp is a paid software. However, they do have a free trial. I cannot show you live tonight because my free trial has expired. I do not use SketchUp. There are some people in our hobby that use SketchUp all the time. And if you don't feel comfortable with this, you can simply put out a post on a Facebook group saying, hey, can anyone convert my Hover, my SKP file for me to my OBJ, my mesh for 3D? And I'm sure someone will help you. There are paid sites you can use. I know some people have had success with that, where you send them the file, they'll convert it for you, and they'll send it back. Frankly, the sites I've come across, I don't trust, and I just didn't want to use them. I'd rather go with the free trial on SketchUp because I did not have to put any financial information or personal information into SketchUp to use it. I just downloaded it and it knew. And once my 30 days was up, it just stopped. I was limited to what I could do. So, but you go to sketchup.com, you sign up for your free trial. Now, once you open it, what I would suggest you do is open up your file and then play around with it. It's going to take a little bit of time to get used to it, but for what our needs are with this software, it's very basic, which is very nice. We don't need to do a lot with it if we're just trying to get a 3D rendering of our home to use in xLights. So we'll open up the .skp file, which is the SketchUp file. And I just like to say, keep it in downloads so you know where it is. You just recently downloaded it, it's in downloads. You don't need to put the SKP file into um, xLights just yet, because you're going to do that, but you're going to rename it. So first thing we'll do is we'll go in, we'll open up SKP, go to downloads. That's the file number, 118970605. That's what came from cover. Pardon me. So now how do we use SketchUp? What we need to do is we need to fill in our house. We need to make it look closer to what our house should look like. When you receive it, it's going to look just plain white, nothing really to it. And you need to make sure that you want to add what we call the textures. And so by adding textures, it's going to allow you to create more definition and easier, or it's going to create definition of the home. But then also when you go to build your layout in 3D, you know where things are. You know where your shutters are. You know where your windows are specifically. It helps you define where you want to put your models. That's the important part. So using the paint can icon, you're going to fill in your textures. It's as simple. You bring up the paint can and you're going to try to drop it in certain segments. And then within that, you can select from a drop-down menu. You can select the exterior. So for instance, you got brick or you have some sort of siding. Then you can select the type of roofing you have or the color of the siding. There's a lot of different choices you can come up with. And frankly, for what you need, keep it basic. Maybe have some fun with it, but keep it basic. So then this is my most recent home, the house I'm currently broadcasting from. And this is what using textures allowed me to do. So I was able to match somewhat the color of the siding, the roof, as well as the windows. The windows you can put in, like I think I have like a frosted mirror, some you can choose like a blinds, something. Because if not, what you do if you don't have a covering over the window, you will be seeing right through it through your house. And sometimes it gets confusing because when you look through that window opening or that door opening, you'll see a random line. And that's actually the back corner or the back portion of your home or a sidewall. So sometimes we want to, or sorry, we want to make sure that we cover the windows. This way here, it doesn't get confusing when we're looking at the actual house in 3D. So, but as you can tell, I use it very simply just to cover in, or sorry, to fill in so I can see the definitions of like my shutters, the roof itself, the brick. The brick is it's actually white, but I used gray because it's just fine. But for what I needed, it works just fine. Okay. My house looks like my house. So now what do I do? Pretty simple. We save as. Now here is where a lot of people get messed up at times. We want to make sure that we save it in our show folder that we're going to use. Whether it's the previous year or current year, you're going to want to save it in a show folder so you know where it's located. The worst thing we can do is save something and then we don't know where it is. So I suggest put it in a show folder, one that you're currently using, so it's easier to remember. So you're going to save it to your show folder. You're going to choose the file name, and then you're going to have no special characters, or spaces. So for instance, here, drop down in SketchUp from File, Save As, and then I named it I'm in my show folder, which in this case was VCS 3D class. It's my show folder, and I named it VCS 3D class. So then I will show you what we next. Then we're going to export next. This is another function that you need to remember because this is the actual file that creates the 3D model for xLights. So you're going to have export. We're going to choose 3D model, what's called an OBJ file or an object file. Then we're going to save it to our xLights show folder where you just previously were. Save it as the same name as the completed texture house file. And once again, no spaces or special characters. And then the exports results window is your texture. So for instance, we'll come over here. So I'm going to come down to the file, scroll down to export. I'm going to create a 3D model. Then it's going to ask me where to save it and how to name it. So then I want to save it as the same thing. So for instance, it's going to be VCS right up here, 3D class, and it's in my show folder, which in this case is the same name. I hit export, and then it gives me my results. These results tell me that I'm using 3 different textures and how it's being used. If you don't have this, when you go to upload your OBJ into xLights, you may have a house, a model, but it won't have any of the texture or any of the details that we want to try to use. So you can use it, but it will be better for you to have your textures. So now, what should I have in my xLights show folder after I export my OBJ? Great question. This is where I was always confused. I had to have people help me this early on when I was learning, and then over time it just made sense. So I wanted to make sure that I put this out there so it's easier to follow. So your show folder must contain the following. Your 3D folder, in this case, it's VCS 3D class. It's what contains your textures. Then your SketchUp save as file, your VCS 3D class.skp, and then your exported OBJ file, VCS 3D class.obj. So now, could you do this in a different order and place it in different locations and it works? Sure. Has xLights improved and now there's a different way you can do it? Possibly. But for me, I know this works and this is how I teach it. So I want to make sure that this is how I promote it because this is what works for me and hopefully it can work for you. So once again, you're going to have 3 different items saved in your show folder. That's important to having your 3D model in xLights. Your 3D folder, which is where you have your all your textures of the house, so like the brick, the shingles of the roof, what you're using for the window coverings, if you have grass, etc. Your SketchUp file, which is mainly for you to use later in case you need to come back to it. And then your OBJ file, which is the actual file you need for xLights. So now that I have the OBJ file, what's next and what do I do? We open xLights. We choose the show folder with our OBJ file. We go to the Layout tab, bottom, check 3D, select 3D models in the models window. And I will get into actual xLights here in a moment to show you. So once again, we go into the Layout tab, come down the very bottom first. We select our 3D check mark. We select yes. Our show folder is directed to the show that has, or the folder that has our 3D elements in it, which is this right here. We're good. This is my show folder. It has my folder with all the textures as well as my OBJ file. And then I go to 3D objects. And from here, we go to the Layout tab, click on 3D objects, and we're going to look for the OBJ file, click on the 3 dots, choose your OBJ file, should be located in your show folder, and then that's where we should now have our actual 3D model in xLights. So for instance, here in xLights, we go to the Layout tab. We've already checked on the very bottom left, make it in 3D. Now we have the option for both models and 3D objects. We're going to go where it says add OBJ. Yeah, and then we're going to OBJ file, hit the three buttons, and then go, and it should automatically direct you to to your show folder. And in that show folder, you should have your respective, in this case, VCS 3D class.obj file. And that's what you need to create your 3D model, which gives you this. Now, obviously, when you look at it, it's different colors because I use different textures because I don't want to get too confused. But then you should end up with the 3D rendering in your layout, which will look like this, and you can move it around like such, which is really nice. And so, like I was saying earlier, you can look at it from down the street at different angles, and you'll be able to do that over here in xLights. So with the first portion of the class, are there any questions regarding Hover, SketchUp, or creating the OBJ file before I go on to the next section? Nope. Okay. Actually, let me look. Perfect. Okay. I forgot to mention this earlier. There are apps you can download. That's a 3D scanning app. I think it's called LiDAR. And it's essentially it uses the same technology that you have a mapping type robot vacuum. It will map your home. It kind of uses the same concept, same technology. I did not find it successful for myself because maybe it's because I have a two-story home and I couldn't get quite high enough for it to scan everything. Maybe for some people that works. I know I've met people in the past where that does work for them. So if you look for a 3D scanning app, some of those will automatically create an OBJ file for you, and that's one less step you have to worry about. So as another option.
Just a comment on that, if I may.
Please.
So I used Meshroom, but it's important, which is a photogrammetry, right? You take like hundreds of pictures of your house
Mhm.
and it spits out a 3D mesh. But it's important to remember that you should not be using that mesh in xLights because it's got like a billion polygons. So what it is good for is it's good for importing into CAD software, and then you take a reference measurement on your house, and then you scale that model to match that reference measurement, and then you can make any measurements you want on your house based on that, and create a CAD model of your house. But you wouldn't want to use the actual output because it has so many polygons.
So
So
good.
that's all I had.
Yeah. And that's good to know. And so, like for me, I would never be able to tell you how to do that. Just because I don't use CAD. My father can, but he does. I can't. I don't know what to do. But for some people, that's what they enjoy doing. They know it, that works, and that's great. Like I said earlier, there's multiple ways you can do this. This is what works well for me. And I'm glad that worked well for you. And I completely understand that, with so many pictures that it's just going to be such a large file, and with all the polygons and everything, it would be tough to use in the actual xLight. So you have to transfer it and do some reconstructing with it. So, any other questions or comments before we go on to actually using xLights in the layout? Nope. Okay. All right. So beginning 3D layouts. Now, this is the fun part, but it's also the frustrating part. This tends to be where people stop wanting to use 3D. Getting the actual 3D model is not too bad, but navigating in 3D can be and is frustrating at times. Even to this day, when I use it, I still get frustrated at times. So in this portion of the class, we're going to understand how to navigate in 3D. We're going to discover some of the most common tools needed to build your layout in 3D. And then we're going to learn some shortcuts to be more efficient while working on our layout in 3D. I promise this is only a few slides, and then we'll actually get into xLights itself. So why 3D? Just like I mentioned earlier, it allows for more accurate scaling, create multiple viewpoints, and then see what your audience is seeing. How do I move things in 3D? If you only learn one thing tonight, please remember this. Right click reset. Say it with me. Right click reset. I promise, I promise, I promise when you first start using 3D, you are going to get confused, disoriented, and that's where the frustration sets in. It happened to me a number of times. And so I promise when you right click and you hit the word reset, it's not going to blow up your computer. It's not going to delete xLights. It's not going to be a bad thing. All it's going to do is take you back to where your default viewpoint is for your layout. Sometimes when you bring in a mesh, it may be that your house is backwards. You're actually looking at the back side of it. And so you may have to turn your mesh around. Or some people actually, keep it there, but you could turn the viewpoint around. Now, I don't suggest that because when you bring in models, they're backwards. And we'll kind of get to that understanding on how to move things in a moment. But the big thing from here, right click reset. I promise, I promise, I promise you will use it and you will need it. I promise. Now, navigating in 3D, few different things to consider. When you're using a mouse, I prefer using a mouse. A trackpad, I cannot use. Other folks prefer a trackpad over a mouse. For me, a mouse works the best. So with the mouse wheel will zoom in and out on an object or an area. Got to be careful of that line because it brings out my Eastern Kentucky. The mouse wheel will zoom in and out on an object or an area. The mouse wheel pressed will move your view up and down and left and right. And then left click pressed will spin around the view or the object. Once again, right click reset, right click reset. Now, different things to consider when you're moving in xLights. Let's start with the actual model itself. So shout out to Jackie. Jackie, if you're in here, it's a showstopper snowflake. I'm using as an example here. When you click on the little orange cube, actually, when you click on the model itself, you're going to have a little orange cube right in the center of it. By clicking on that orange cube, you're going to have three different options. You're going to have the ability to move it physically. You're going to have the ability to change the size and then the rotation. So the y-axis, the green arrow, moving it up and down vertically. Red is your x-axis or horizontal. And then the blue axis is your depth, your front to back movement. When we're in 2D, we can build a layout in 2D much faster in 3D because we're only having vertical and horizontal axis. Once we have a 3D, or once we have the 3D, the z-axis involved, now we have to place it front to back. Sometimes when you think you have it in place, and then you look at it from the bird's eye, you're 14 feet in front of your house, and it shouldn't be there. It should be on the house. So that's something we got to keep in mind. That's where the using 3D takes a little bit longer to build your layout. Now, how can I fit items to scale? Here is the beauty of 3D. Yes, you can do this in 2D as well. So this is important. Even if you in the future never want to use 3D, this is a function that you can use in both. It is more accurate in 3D, but it is still very good in 2D. So we can create a ruler which will help us give a better idea of what the scale is of the model to the house. So if I have a 24-inch snowflake and I want to make sure that the dimensions are 24 inches, and then I put it on my house, then I can see, yes, it will fit in between my two windows. Or you know what? This is much bigger of a span than I want. So maybe I need to put a 48-inch snowflake. That's where it kind of helps you. It helps you with depth in your yard, understanding, you know what? I have a 14-foot tree. Is it going to be blocking stuff behind it? Okay. We use the ruler function. So what we would do is we go into our 3D objects in the layout tab. We're going to go to add OBJ right up here on top, add an OBJ. Then it's going to drop down and it's going to give us the option to choose ruler. Once we choose the ruler, we're going to move this one single burgundy line within the model itself. Now, like I said, it can be in 2D. Um, Typically in 3D, we want to put it up against something we know the distance of. For instance, here I'm using a a window. I know that the window itself from just the glass portion is roughly 29 inches. So what I'll do is under ruler, I'll make sure that it's active. If you choose to uncheck that, it's then inactive. It's still there. It's still being used to scale everything. It's just hidden. It's not in sight. Because you want it, you can move it afterward, but typically I leave it there and just uncheck active. Units, I go to inches. I did choose feet one time, and that was an issue because most of our models are based in inches. And so so if I choose feet, then it's going to give me, then I have to go in for the dimensions and put, 1.5 feet for 18 inches or 1.25 for some. So it's a little bit more difficult. So if you prefer inches, or centimeters, you can choose which you prefer or meters, etc. So for me, inches is what works best. And then I put in the length of it. For me, it's 29 inches. What shortcuts can I use? And after this, I promise we'll get into it. And I'll start showing you some of these shortcuts and how we can go about using them to make programming or creating our layouts much, much easier. Um, we're going to highlight two or more models, then right click. We have a few different things you can choose from. Align, which will place your models on the same plane quicker. So you can go top, you're going to align them by the top, by the bottom, by the left or right, with the ground, etc. Distribute, create equal intervals between models. Before I was a programmer, I was a high school band director, so I taught marching band. I wish it was very simple to highlight a row of trumpets and just right click and say, give me equal intervals for the entire show. It wasn't. That's what I love about xLights is I can tell my students in xLights what to do, hit save, and they remember. So distribute creates equal intervals between models. The resize will match the size quickly, adjust to match the highlighted model. So the model that's highlighted, anything you adjust, whether it's the size, the distribution, or the align, that's what it's adjusting to is the highlighted model. Now, with the size, and I'll demonstrate this in a moment, you have um, three sizes to make sure you have configured. You have sides, vertical, horizontal, and then you also have the z-axis, the depth. If your depth is off, it will not line up correctly, and I'll show you that in a moment. So, before we get into it, any quick questions where I've lost anyone? Nope. Okay, perfect. All right, so let's now get into some xLights. So here, let me back out. So this is my old house that you saw. What I want to do is actually go into my mesh and I want to change the brightness. Let's see what happens. 50. Boom. And as you can see, it looks like what I just showed you. All right. I was able to go in. and we added the texture so it would replicate what we see here. Now, I did not do this with this house. A friend of mine, Keith Kelly, did this for me because he knew SketchUp and he was able to help me really quick with this. But he did a great job for me. Um, so this is our mesh. I can move around. I'm holding my left click button and just moving it left rotates it to the viewpoint left. Right comes to the right. Pulling it down, pushes it down, left. Now what's going to happen? I'm just going to throw it. Now all of a sudden I'm underneath it. I'm moving my wheel back and forth. How do I get back to the front? I don't know. It's way out here. You will do something, I promise. And all of a sudden you can't find your house. What did I say? Right click, reset, boom, right there. I promise that's the only thing you will learn tonight is right click reset. I promise it will help you. The ruler. The ruler is inactive. If I check it, boom, you should see it and it pops open right here in the window that I'm using. Boom. All right, I'm going to take it off again. There we go. All right. Now let's play around with some models. So as you can see, I have some different models in here, and they're not always all placed exactly where I want them to be. So for instance, the big glaring one, let's start up here with my horizontal roof line. So I have three segments of at the top of my roof. This one needs to be even with the one on the right, with this one over here. I can easily move it up or down. Okay, I'm pretty sure I can eyeball it. I think I'm pretty close. But another option with a shortcut, I know that this horizontal on the rooftop is correct. That's where I want it to be. So I'm going to right click, holding down my command or control button, right clicking, or sorry, left click again, have two highlighted. Like I said earlier, the one that has the actual box around it with the arrows, that's where it's going to align itself to that. That's your main model when you're making adjustments. Right click. I'm not going to bulk edit. Not going to align just yet. Not going to distribute. Not going to resize. Let's go back to align. I'm going to align bottom. And it moved it down for me. Now, sometimes, as you see, the two lines are where they need to be. That's great. But we have some issues with the snowflakes. All right, so let's figure out what we're going to do with my snowflakes. So this one is a 24-inch snowflake, but it's not quite the right size. So we'll go over here. Under dimensions, I'm in the 3D models window. I can put the dimensions I want, the width, the height, and the depth. Okay, but before I do that, let's go to this one. I know this one is correct. So let's go back over here. My dimensions, my width is 23.5, 23.6, and 1. The depth is important, and I'll show you why in a moment. Okay, I can go in and hit 24. Sometimes it rounds up, like it'll just, it won't be 24. It may go to 23.95 and then 23 and then, 24.1 for whatever reason. And for me, that's fine. That's close enough. I know this snowflake is correct, but let's make all of these the same size now. So I'm going to keep that one highlighted, hold down Command or Control. I want to change this one to be the same size as the one I know is correct. Right click, resize. I can match the width, match the height, or match the entire size. So I'm going to match the entire size. Boom. Now looking at it, they look correct. Let's compare. Width is 24, height is 24, and the depth is 1. And as you can see, they're all in inches. Let's go see the one I corrected. Scroll down, 24.75, which is close enough for me, 24.71 in height, but then the depth is not near the 1-inch mark. I don't know why, but whenever you resize, it only sizes the width and the height. It does not adjust to depth. I'm sure there's a very logical reason for it. I just don't know. If you wanted to align these by, let's say, the front, I want to put this one, the second one here, in between these these two snowflakes, so they should all be on the front. Right click, align, front, boom. It's not here. It's actually there. It's farther back than where I need it to be simply because what it's thinking right now is that the front of that snowflake, you can see it better this way, is 24 inches in front of where you actually see it. So as I teach this class and as I'm telling people, when you go and you change the size of your models, always make sure that whatever number you choose, for me, it's one, that the depth matches for all of them. So when you resize and you go to a line, all of a sudden they're not in a line with each other. It's because the depth sizes are not the same. So you have to choose your depth size and make sure that it's consistent from model to model, including your straight lines. So keep that in mind. So for now, let's say, all right, this is where I want it to be. Actually, you know what? I want it to line up with this one since I moved these. Highlight the first one, hold down Command or Control, left click, whatever ones I want. Perfect. Now right click, align. I'm going to align the bottom. Boom. Oh, it didn't move. You know what? I bet you it's because, oh, no, that works. Oh, I'm so sorry. I chose bottom. Right click, align, front. Boom. There we go. All right. And as you can see, now that I have three of them connected, or not connected, but highlighted, if I want to leave them there, you can tell that the spacing is not quite equal. These two are almost touching with their respective outline box, and there's a good amount of space here. Right click, distribute. I want to distribute horizontally, which is left and right, and boom. And now they're equally spaced. And so, all right, so those are where I want it. But you know what? I want to move this one back up front here, right? Hold that one down, highlight, Command, highlight the second one, right click. I want to align it with the front. Uh-oh, not working, most likely because, come on. There you go, 242 inches. So that one is wrong. All right, so now what I'll do, highlight it, that's saved. Let's go back. So sorry, highlight, Command, boom, right click, align front, boom. And now we're there. Straight line, there we want to be. It's higher. So now I'm going to right click, align, bottom. Boom. And now it puts it there. Oh, you know what it did? It took, oh, reset. It took my window model for some reason, Command Z, and it moved it. Don't know why that got highlighted, but it did. So now let's go by itself. Boom, boom, right click, align, bottom, and there you go. So this one here, I'm at 242 inches depth. Let's change it to 1. I want this to go back. So let's line it up with this one. Align, front. Oh, most likely this one's off, etc. And so I'll change it again to 1. Boom. This will be the last one I show this. So we can move on. And so align, front, and there we go. So now, if we want to move, this will be a good one to move. Once again, shout out to Jackie and EFL Designs. You can see I have to use a lot of his models still to this day. So we have the arrows, which allows us to move. So green is vertical, red's horizontal, blue is your depth or your front to back. And then I click on the little orange box again. Now I can resize. I can resize it manually here or over in the model window, give me the dimensions I need. I tend to just stick over here by the actual numbers versus just eyeballing it. Um, Click on it again, and now I can rotate on the different axis points with whichever way I need to go with it. Okay. Now that I've moved it, what I can do is, you know what? I want it to be even with this one. Click there, highlight the second one, right click, align, bottom, move. Let's do align front, and it puts it right out front for me. Boom. Like this one here is down too low. I want it to be even with the one on the right. Right click, or sorry, left click, highlight, hold down command, left click on the one I want to move, right click for my shortcuts, and then go up to align, and let's say bottom again. Boom. And then we're there. And so, um, any questions with navigating? The next part I'm going to show you is sometimes we have effects that don't render correctly and how we adjust those. Um, any quick questions on navigating in 3D for your layout? So a question that came in up here. Can you bulk edit measurements? Yeah, actually, yes. Let me. So kind of what we were just doing, where if all of these, let's just change all the random. So I got here, boom. Let's change this to boom like that. I wanted to change the size of these to match this one. This is the one I want to match, so I'll click that one first. Command Control, click the others I want to change. Right click, and it's automatically going to bulk edit anything you have highlighted. So then I'll do resize, match size, and it changes it. There's no actual bulk edit button for resizing or aligning. It's anything you have highlighted will automatically do that for you. So, one thing that I do want to make you aware of, in 3D, you cannot create a center point. You have to do 2D for your center points. So for instance, here's my center point. It's aligned with my door. If I go over to 3D, it's not there. Okay. In order to move your center point and adjust and create your center point, you have to do that in 2D. Now, this can be a problem because if you're using something on the Z axis, which I'm going to show you, for instance, over here, these three lines, if I'm decorating the side of my house, the center point for these three lines, I cannot create because it's on a Z axis. So for instance, that's called side lines. So there's no center point. So right now it's centering on the very end of the line. So like the last pixel of each line is where the center point is. So what you would have to do is go in back into 3D, take all of these. So for instance, you can click one, let me zoom in, click, hold on, highlight all three. Come on. And I can rotate all of them together. Where's my green? Here it is. Boom. And this is how it should work. So now they are facing the front. If I go to 2D, I'll see them stick out. And then I'll go to my group up here, my sidelines, and now I can adjust where the center is. Okay. Which should work. So if I wanted my center point to be over here, I can now do that. And so just keeping that in mind in case you have a side of your house, side of a building or a property, and you need to create a center point. As far as I know, you have to create it in 2D and then adjust in 3D. where everything goes um, before you can have an actual center point that you control. If not, it's just going to automatically default to where it is physically centered within those group of props. So, all right, so now let's go back to 3D. Let me move these. Control Z. Yep, perfect. Okay. In case you don't know, Command Control Z, at least on Mac, is a takes you one step back. And what you just did is an undo key. I use it every day, multiple times a day while programming and designing. So that is another shortcut that you can use. So, all right, let me save this. Let's get into actual programming. And perfect. And this is something that a lot of people um, get confused with while using 3D. Um, and I want to take a step back too. You do not have to use 3D in xLights. If you have a two-dimensional layout in real life, then stay with two-dimensional. Um, if you are choosing to go to 3D, that's completely fine. However, I would say don't use your current show folder if you're within, let's say, a month or two of going live with your show. Stick with 2D, maybe make a duplicate of your show folder, create the 3D layout, play around with it, and use it the following year. The last thing you want to do is all of a sudden you have a 3D model, it's rendering differently than you thought it would, and all of a sudden your show is not what you had hoped. Because 3D can create problems that you're not aware of and how to fix some things. Sometimes when we're using 3D, we tend to create a 2D model or another 2D layout just because it may render better in 2D than actually in 3D. So if you look at our new house with Magical Light Shows, it's a very large footprint of a house, and it has essentially two wings on it. One is at a 90 degree and one is at a 45 degree. Um, we have to use 3D for that house because of there's so many angles, so many cuts. 3D is the only way we can make it work. And so there's some different ways, some things that we know that sometimes they don't render how we want them to render, but we can manipulate them in a way where we can. And I won't get into that necessarily, but I'm going to show you some tricks here. So for instance, we always start with magical light shows whenever we're on site, whenever we're testing, um, making sure that our layout and our pixels physically on the house or on the building are what we call pixel perfect. Making sure that anything whenever we put something up there, we know exactly when we have a center point on a large snowflake that it matches both in the software and physically in real life. One thing we do, pretty simple, we use a bars effect. We make sure it's going left and right, up and down, and we understand that when we see it on the on the computer and the software, that it's hitting um, like where the chimney is at the same time in real life and on the software. Maybe sometimes we have to move certain models around. Now, I'm only showing you the outlines because I want to get to some of the problems we see versus the entire house. But we use this simple effect um, to make sure that um, our product, our shows that we design for our clients are as top notch as possible, as the best that we can get for them. Now, the problem we have, if we look here, I also have, oh, I tell you what, let me stop this. Let me get on here. Where'd you go? I was on it. I'm going to delete it. All right. So now I have the front of my house just doing simple outlines. I want the side lines to do the exact same thing. So right now I'm going to copy it. I'm going to go down to my group, which is sidelines. Boom. Oh yeah, I know. I know. Bad, 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 bad. Oh, and of course I can't see it because you're in the way. There we go. Okay, boom. That's fine. Let's make this bigger. Okay, let's go back up here. Control C, paste it, because I don't have any timing marks. That's fine. Now I have the same bars effect going on my side horizontal lines. But if you notice, the lines on the front are moving pretty smoothly. The ones on the side are not. This happens a lot simply because it's rendering from a default standpoint. I will make sure, let's get rid of this. There we go. From a default. So it's looking at it from the front going back. So that's why it's really choppy. Now, what we can do, we're going to go to our layout. We're going to come over here. We're going to make this group. All right. So this is kind of where the center point of that group is. All right. This is why people oftentimes use 3D is to help with different rendering processes. So what we can do, this is kind of where I want it to be. So I'm going to right click. I'm going to save this current viewpoint. So I'm looking at it from the side of my house. I want to save it. Now I'm going to load this as driveway, driveway view. Okay, boom. All right, so now save. Let's do this. Let's go back out here and let's go right click reset front. Now I can right click and let's load a viewpoint. Let's go to, oh, driveway view, boom, and right on the side. Okay. So if you have a large scale display that's in 3D, this is one way you can quickly navigate to your different areas, to your different scenes. So for instance, if you're doing a 3D layout and you have multiple homes or multiple scenes, and you want to quickly skip to that scene, that's one way you can do is create a layout or create a viewpoint, right click, and it takes you there. Now, when it comes to rendering, as you can see here, it's not acting the same way as the lines on the front of the house. What I want to do is come over to my layer settings, click on the render style. Instead of default, we're going to choose per preview. Now, it adjusted a little bit, but not much. It's not great. It's still choppy. Now, my camera is not grayed out. Click it. Now I have different viewpoints I can load. Now what it's going to do, it's going to render from as if it's looking at, if it's standing in that viewpoint where what we just created. So if I click it, boom, now it's moving much smoother, as you can see here. Let me kind of get this angled right so you can see it. So it's moving much smoother. It's not as choppy, and it's what we want. This is quite often what a lot of people have issues with. Let me go here. Yeah. Is when you're looking at something, it doesn't quite look right. Like especially if you have snowflakes, a snowflake effect falling or twinkle. Default in 2D, it looks great. But if you're in 3D and it's going around um, multiple angles, it sometimes will light up just that respective entire line of light. So let's see if I go here to twinkle. All right. Looks great there. Perfect. Okay. Let's go down here. Let's change this one to twinkle. Let's see what happens. Twinkle, boom, there we go. All right. It is acting as if it needs to. Let me go over here real quick. Let's change this down to 5 so we can see a little better. Oh, I'm so sorry. So sorry. Brightness is at 5. Got it selected first. Boom. Okay. And now we can see it a little better. And what we're going to do, I want to change this render style to default. And now you can see bars lighting up. It's acting as if you're looking at it from the front. I know it's a little difficult to see because of the brightness. But what's happening is treating each segment as a single pixel. Oftentimes, you'll see this in 3D and wonder why you have a group of 5, 8, 25 pixels lighting up when it should be a single twinkle. What you need to do, have your viewpoint created, go to per preview, go from 2D to driveway, and now it's created my twinkling effect. Percentage light so you can see it a little better. Okay. So, um, one quick thing to actually two quick things before I stop and take questions. Um, in in 3D, we get asked a lot, how do we design a 3D house um, in programming and layout? What we tend to do is we create two different, not necessarily viewpoints, but groups. So for instance, I have an all group that would consist of the front side of my house, and then I would have a second all group that would be the side of my house. And the reason we do this is if I'm looking at this side here, I'm not going to necessarily see a shock wave come from the center and wrap around. I would just see kind of like a partial wave of lights just kind of moving. So if I want to get a full shockwave effect from the front and the side, then I would want to create a secondary group, all group for the side. Treat it as if you're almost having two different layouts within a single layout. Um, Whenever we're designing drive-throughs, we typically don't do a lot of full group effects that create giant shock waves or some sort of movement across the entire group because when a person is looking at one particular model, they're just going to see it flash versus seeing a wave of lights coming through. So that's one thing, just a little trick to keep in mind when you are programming a three-dimensional object, um, and you want both sides to look the same. Sometimes you need to create um, all groups for each respective side versus one giant all group for the entire object itself. Just something to keep in mind. Um, if you're in 2D, you can go back and forth between 2D and 3D. This doesn't look great because it's based in 3D. If you build it in 2D, you can go back and forth. So you can go from here into 3D. And if I know that this one line is supposed to be 96 inches long, then I could move my ruler and make sure I go up and down 96 inches. Now I have something to use for my base of dimensions for all of my objects. Um, if you're in 2D, but then you want to have um, a pixel field. All right. Is that my cube model? Nope, wrong one. Yes, confirm delete. There we go. So um, for us, we design our pixel fields using a cube model for the most part, unless it's a custom. You cannot use a cube model in 2D simply because it's a three-dimensional object. But what I can do is I can view it in 3D, but still work in 2D. So for instance, now I can use it, work in 2D all I want. I go and play it. Great, looks perfect. But now I'm missing my pixel field. I can't see it. Click on 3D, and there you go. I'm going to actually move it out of the way so you can see what it looks like in 2D. So it looks like just straight lines. Okay, and you can't see the depth of it because it's in 2D. So I can go back and forth in between and see what it looks like in 3D without having to use 3D for everything. And so um, that's about where I have, or that's about kind of where that's what I have for now. Um, Questions. So if we have any general questions for everyone, I'd be glad to answer it. If you have some individual questions, I'd be glad to answer those too after we stop recording. So general questions for everyone. Let's go to chat. This is exactly my problem. All this is the answer. Money. Great. You can send
Actually, I'm gonna clarify that a little bit. It's part of the answer. Excuse me. Um, but the second part of the answer is having separate groups for the side, which is what you explained next, right? Because the layer buffer rendering method would not apply if you applied an effect to a group. Is that correct? That's my experience, at least.
Uh,
I
if
may
we're
have not stated that very well.
yeah, ask it again.
Okay, so let's say you have a strand of lines or a strand of lights that only exists on the z-axis.
Yep,
The let's say you have an all group and you want to do a shockwave. The rendering engine by default on that all group is going to see that as a single pixel
correct,
because it's looking at it in 2D. So
correct,
that's why you went through that. Have a separate group for your side view,
exactly,
essentially. Because I have like in my example, I have like a walkway that's straight that leads up to my front door, and those pixels exist perfectly on the z axis. So the all group treats it as a single pixel if you're doing an effect, and they all light up at once.
correct, exactly. That is yes. So if you have a three-dimensional walkway, essentially you have basically a hallway going from your front walkway, and you have that a lot, lit up with different models. Yes, sometimes what we do, we can you can change you can mess with the per preview in general, and it will help it. It won't be perfect, but it will be better than default. Then you can also change your viewpoint, even if it's not directly on the side, and sometimes that will also help it. If we look at um, if you've purchased a Magical Light Show sequence within the past 2 years, and it was one of the later sequences in the year, and you received it on the big house layout. Um, if you look at all the groups we create, it's because of rendering. Yes, it's because of the musicality and kind of we're dividing up, vertical lines into every other one, every other three, etc. But a lot of them have to do with rendering. So if you look, the scale of that house is so large, and I will show you guys real quick. Um, we'll go here, objects, grid lines, which I don't have active. Um, this kind of tells your all groups how far out it can go. All right. So if you have a shock wave and you go full full radius, it will stop here most likely. If you have a object that is much bigger than this grid, then you have to change the grid itself. If you look at that, the new house, we have a 700 or 800 grid, and then a 1000 and 2000 grid. And then we have different viewpoints for all kinds of places. And so in 3D, you have different ways to solve problems, but also you have more issues that arise potentially in 3D. And quite frankly, sometimes what you may want to do if you have straight lines that are going um, depth wise from front to back, um, honestly, what I would do is just take those two lines or three lines and move them flat. So now when it renders, it's going to render as if it's in 2D. You don't need to change the entire setup. What I would do is take those two lines that are like I showed over here. If these three lines were part of my all group up here, what I would do is quite frankly is take this and then move them flat to the front. I can't find it. There it is. Like so. And then it'll render as if that is part of the all group in 2D under default. That's
Yeah,
that's one way you can get away with it.
yeah. What I've done is I've angled those lines down, um,
Yep.
and not like fully vertical, but at a pretty steep
It's
angle.
enough.
And
Mhm.
then that makes the like the spiral rendering and everything look good in 3D. But you'd kind of have to just adjust it enough to get the render engine happy. So yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Um, what about trees and bushes, David? Can you elaborate a little more on that? Are you talking about rendering, bring them in as far as a part of the OBJ file? Exactly. What are you thinking there?
Like the OBJ file, having trees in front of your house where it could potentially block a view from your viewers.
Yeah, you can bring those in through SketchUp. I don't. I did. I tried working on it, and I couldn't get it. I couldn't figure it out. For some reason, every time I moved a tree, it would resize it, and I just didn't have the patience for it. And it was like, what's going on? You can bring those objects in, and I've seen them. If you're patient enough and good enough with SketchUp to do that. I know a client where they had like an apple orchard, and when they built out their 3D model, she had all the apple trees exactly where they should be, the same size, everything, and it was beautiful. Um, it took a little while to do it, but it was looked great. And so, but I just, yes, it can be done. It just takes a little bit of time. And you use SketchUp. So, oh, yeah, that's a good, John. Thank you. This is another thing that I did. So John says you can use um, the satellite image, which it's not going to show up here because I don't have this in my file. Because he says that 50% brightness is here. And I'll zoom in briefly so you can kind of see what it looks like. So look here, you can kind of see the outline of my house. Here's my driveway. This is the satellite image. So what I did is I took this screenshot, this PNG, loaded in put it in my folder, and then there's two ways you can do it. You can bring it in as an image, and then you rotate it. For instance, just like you do a regular model, you can move it left or right. Oh, it's locked, right? No. Yeah, it's locked. Oh, how do I unlock it? That's why it's not moving. No. But anyway, you can bring it in. It'll bring it in vertically, but then you'll have to rotate it and then adjust the size so it fits the scale of your home. Or you can add an OBJ and you can do a terrain and it automatically lays it flat for you. So you may have to spin it, but it automatically puts it flat for you. So yeah, thank you, John. Thank you. I forgot about that. And that's a really good trick to learn too, to know is using a satellite image as your base. And I actually did that with my current house because I'm on a hill. And so I took pictures because my house is new, so I don't have a satellite image yet. So I took pictures and kind of chopped up the picture so I can give myself a hill and what it looked like. So, all right, Jeff, what about a viewpoint that is off axis, like an ISO view, then use that to render? That's similar to here. If I wanted to use just the outlines on this side, it would be an ISO view. Um, or if I turned it to the front, slightly angled it, so then I can put this in the all group, so it would render as if you're looking from the front.
Yeah, I was meaning more like when you're going to do the all groups. Like if you could set an off-axis camera view so you can render the all group at once.
Oh, I see what you're saying. I got you. We go here. Yeah, so you can change the view. Are you saying like for here? Oh no, you're saying from up here, right? Do, 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 do,
But
do.
I mean, we were talking about like you could render from the front, and then you have to have a separate camera view to render from the side for some of the sequences. I was just saying if you could have an ISO camera view, like even what you have here, and use that for your all sequence.
You can. It all depends on like you couldn't go exactly. You couldn't go all the way left. You
Uh-huh.
could go all the way front. You would have to do some sort of isolation where it's at an some sort of angle oblique, and then you can see how it works. Most likely, what will happen is that it's going to move faster um, going away because it's trying to cover the same distance. So it's going to move quicker if you're doing like a shockwave effect.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah,
and so,
I would pretty much always render from the what I would consider to be the ideal viewing position,
mhm.
right? Because like if you did an isometric like view, which I assume now that I've seen that trick, thank you very much. Uh, I know how to do it. But if you were to do that, I think all of your effects would be like centered as if you were viewing the house at that 45-degree angle. You know what I mean? And then
Yes.
if you're standing in front of the house, things are going to look a little wonky because you're not in the perspective of the camera from which it was rendered.
Correct. Yeah, and we often our default viewpoint is from our camera. Whether it's on Tom's house or my house, we always say it's this is where my camera is going to be. Let's load it here, and then once we fine tune it in the field, then my viewpoint may change.
Mm.
We will often go, a lot of different iterations of viewpoints, um, and most of the time it's only one. It's from where things are physically placed. It may, in real life, when you're standing, what you think is in front may look off-centered, but then once you stand where the lens is, now everything is balanced and it makes sense. And so it all depends too, like what you're looking at, or the reasoning for the display. Is it for a camera or is it for a viewing of people? And so, for instance, like for me, mine is mostly for people with video recording as an option. So I have to take into both, but I have got to consider um, both aspects. Um, for Tom, it's mostly now video, but we all still have some groups that come by, so we got to take that into consideration too. So, um, yep, sidewalks. There we go. Let's go back. Good. Got you there. Okay, so yeah, John, this is I'm glad you said this. This will be if there's no other questions, this will be my last thing. In 2D, it is very easy to accidentally move models. Very easy. If I want to move multiple models, I'll click on it, and then all of a sudden I'll accidentally shift it just like it did there. And that drives me nuts. Drives me nuts. So then I'll have to click Control Z and I'll move them back, whatever. In 3D, or so in 2D, you may want to lock them. Right click, lock, and it's there. In 3D, it's much harder. Actually, you can't move a model accidentally multiple at a time because you have to physically use the arrows. So that is the benefit of 3D. 3D does take time to build out your layout. It just does. Um, we only use 3D in a commercial setting if we have to. If we can build it in 2D, we do. Even if we have like a tunnel for a drive-through, oftentimes we'll create a matrix. Just a general matrix, know how long each segment is for each arch, create a matrix so we know what's going to look like, and boom. We also use 3D actual arches. This way here, we can give the client an idea of what they're looking at, but sometimes it's just easier to build a matrix to match the parameters of the tunnel and go. Just because it's all about efficiency for us. I've never used 2D. I think 3D takes just the yeah. Yeah, if you've never used 2D, then 3D is what you're used to, and it's great. So, um, my big takeaway is if you want to get into 3D, don't be scared. Take your time, right click, reset, enjoy what it does as far as the view, and don't get frustrated. You will get frustrated, but don't allow that to stop you from the joy of what this hobby brings to us and the millions of people that see our lights throughout the year. Um, Remember, it's fun. Remember that. Just keep it fun.
I
So,
do have one more, and I'm sorry if I like to talk a lot. I'm sorry about that.
are you good?
I have one more point tip that I would kind of like to mention. That's something I recently discovered. If you highlight a strand, just like one of your roof lines or whatever,
Mhm.
you can actually click on either of the blue or the green box to make that the point that you're moving, and that is kind of absolutely necessary if you're doing stuff in 3D
Yes.
because you may have it angled 45 to your house or whatever, and you need to be able to, in addition to rotating and whatever, that is a very helpful little tidbit.
Yeah. So like this viewpoint, that looks straight. It just looks a little too long. But then if I look at it from the top, it's like, oh, that's not where it's supposed to be. So then I can't move. I move the entire thing from the center. And thank you for mentioning this. I can click one end and move it where I need to be. Okay, and it's still not quite high, too low, etc. So yeah, thank you for that. That is something that that is necessary. So, um, any other questions for the group as a whole? If not, I'll stay on after we stop recording for a few minutes if anyone has individual things. Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, so you're not so sometimes you'll look at it from you won't realize it, but you're actually looking at the wiring view versus the front. Um, yeah, that's exactly. Yep. Can you align something to the face of your house model? Not a shortcut. There's not a shortcut that I know that you can go in and align it to a portion of the mesh. But what you can do, like here, is I want this to be, right on the front of my house. If I go through it, it's gone. It's inside my office. Now all of a sudden I put it right there, and then I can highlight the other items that I know is on this wall, right click, and then align to the front or to the back of this respective model. And that's how you do it. And so, um, any other quick questions? No? Oh, thank you. Yes, good luck. Sorry, we had a little bit of technical issues starting, but thank you for being here. I know we had a good amount of people, so awesome. I appreciate that. Thank you.